Guys, welcome to Chapter 2, Session 2 of our small group series, Antidote for Self. Chapter 2 in our book, Humility, the Joy of Self-Forgetfulness, is titled How the Gospel Fuels Humility. How the Gospel Fuels Humility. So we talked about in Chapter 1, some of the preface and some of the early intro to the book, that gospel integrity is this critical thing in the Christian life, and that humility is one of these essential elements. What Chapter 2 will establish right off the bat is a very interesting statement. And it says this: the gospel is the source of true humility. In fact, it's very adamant. The gospel is the only true source of true humility. I want you to pause this for a second, and I want you to try to explain and maybe even defend this statement. How would you defend to even a non-Christian why the gospel is the only source of true humility? Go ahead and pause and talk about that for a second. Hope that was a good conversation, because the gospel is the essential truth of the state of man and the state of God, our inability to change things, our inability to have power over sin, or our inability to even be God. It gives us the right perspective on what is at the core of humanity, our need for God and our inability to deal with sin. So it creates the perfect clarity for the human condition, becomes the only true source for humility. I'd like you to think about this. There's an interesting conversation in the beginning of Chapter 2 that says this, that oftentimes growing in humility can be difficult to talk about, because in some essence, if you begin to talk about and think about growing in humility too much, you begin to focus on it, you might become boastful. It's actually a little bit easy to begin to take pride in your humility, which sounds funny, because it's such a contradiction. So let me ask you a different question then. How do you identify in other people that they're humble? How do you see people and go, man, that person's growing in humility, or that's a very humble person? What is it you see in other people that leads you to believe that about them? Go ahead and pause this for a second and just talk about your experiences of meeting someone that you thought was really, truly humble. I hope your conversation was excellent. Have you ever played the comparison game to feel better about yourself? The comparison game is where you look at someone who's doing something, maybe in the case of righteousness, maybe more sinful than you or more outwardly sinful than you. In terms of ability, maybe it's somebody that's just not as good at something that you can do better. But the comparison game is where we find somebody that's doing something worse than us, and we use them as the standard so that we feel elevated. We feel much better about ourselves because we're doing it better than that person. We call that the comparison game. What I'd like you to do is think about for a moment how prone we are to do that. And then I want you to read together Philippians 2, 3 through 5. I'm going to give you a few moments. And once you read that, I'd like you to talk about any example you have of playing the comparison game. And then I want you to answer this statement after, or this question afterwards. According to Philippians 2, 3 through 5, what is the true standards of comparison, the only standard of comparison that we should actually be using? Go ahead and do that, have those conversations, and then you can come back and unpause this recording. Welcome back. Okay, I want you to say this together. You might have to line it up so you can get this synchronized, but I want you to say this together. My sins put Jesus on the cross. My sins put Jesus on the cross. Here, say it with me. My sins put Jesus on the cross. Now, the book says that us getting an understanding of this is the first step that really helps us in this road to humility, this understanding that it was me that put Jesus on the cross. But it's only the first step, because it really helps us prepare for the one right after that, which is then seeing how much we're loved, how lovely Jesus is, and how much he must have loved us to willingly be put on the cross. And so that leads us to this idea that what the gospel is doing at the same time is showing us how awful we were and how lovely and amazing Jesus was to love us that much. It shows us both things, a very, very bad thing and a very, very good thing at the same time, and that will have an impact on us. And I love the analogy the book uses. So what I want you to do, you're going to pause this and you're going to go to page 22 and you're going to read the analogy on page 22 of the king. And then when you've read that, I want you to talk in your group about how you would feel if you were in that scenario going into the royal chambers. Go ahead and pause. Welcome back. All right. The last paragraph on page 24 kind of spills into page 25, offers this idea that the Gospels is providing both of these perspectives, the perspective of lowliness and the perspective of loveliness. And I'd love you to read that together. Talk a little bit about, really, I think that's a good summation of this chapter. And when you finish that, you can go ahead and answer question 2 in the discussion chapters, and then finish off tonight with some prayer requests. So what are some things that you'd really like to work on? This is a commitment to the group, personally, based on the things that you've learned over the course of the last week in regards to yourself and the gospel and humility. And once again, where can your group pray for you? And if you're into sensitive subjects and you don't feel comfortable, please, by all means, split into 2 genders and split into separate rooms or separate areas and do that. Don't miss an opportunity to be vulnerable and authentic in your community group. All right. Thanks, guys. Praying for you.